Hello, dear listener. Before we begin, I wanted to remind you about an Urbanist Happy Hour coming up this Friday, January 23rd at 6 p.m. at Neon Cowboy. All your favorite Urbanist groups are going to be there. Strong Denver, Denver Streets Partnership, YIMBY Denver, Denver Bicycle Lobby, Greater Denver Transit, and you may even see me and Andy there. So join us this Friday at Neon Cowboy for a happy hour. See you then. Hello, I'm James Warren.
And I'm Andy Cushion.
And this is the Denver Urbanism Podcast, a podcast about all things city building in the capital of Colorado, Denver.
James, we're not talking news today, are we?
Well, we're not talking new news.
Oh, but maybe some old-timey, sepia-toned news?
Yeah, you know I love to delve through the old newspapers and see what I can find.
And what did you get to this time, James? What were you particularly obsessed with today?
Well, I'm obsessed with the fact that we're the capital of this great state of Colorado. It seems as a given today, right? Of course, Denver's the capital of Colorado. But how did this happen? And more importantly, what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks of being the capital?
I mean, it was like a very contentious thing, right? I mean, like if you've ever read any Colorado history, I will just alert you to the fact that all fourth graders in Colorado do take a Colorado history class. So they would know this, get your local friend. And they'd be able to tell you like, oh, it was Golden, but then it became Denver. But this was like very contentious. There were actually lots of cities in the running at the time. I was not aware of this full list of cities.
Yeah, so you could talk to your local fourth grader and they may be able to inform you about this. But
I think they would. They're pretty well known. Yeah.
Back in the 1800s, when Colorado was just a territory, there was sort of a referendum among the territorial government to decide where should we put the state capital. Now, a lot of people were already kind of in the orbit of Denver. That was already our most populous city, but they didn't want to put it there. And so they said, well, let's put it in Colorado City, which is now Colorado Springs. And then they went down to Colorado City. And for the first time, these legislators who just voted to make this the capital experienced Colorado City for the first time. And what they found was awful. The infrastructure there was terrible. The city was apparently just kind of disgusting to them. And so they retreated back to Denver and said, okay, we're not going to put it down in Colorado City. Let's put it in Golden. But that also had a problem.
But they didn't have any hotels in Golden, right? I think that's so funny, but that's it. So all of the legislators just kept having to come back to Denver to stay the night. And then they just were doing committees in Denver rather than doing formal business in Golden. So that one was kind of blown through pretty quick as well.
And so Colorado, when they were forming the Constitution, said, okay, we're not even going to deal with what the capital city is right now, because they thought that if they said that the capital city would be Denver, enough people wouldn't sign on to the Constitution that it just wouldn't be ratified. And so they said, we're going to hold a state referendum and we're going to decide where the capital city is going to be. And in 1881, they held that referendum. There were a number of cities up for vote. There was Del Norte, there was Pueblo, there was Colorado Springs, there was Canyon City, there was Salida, and then, of course, there was Denver. And the Rocky Mountain News said it best. They said, just as easy. Denver gets the capital and doesn't try half, which I think is pretty cocky of them. But yes, Denver received 66% of the vote and became our state capital officially. Canyon City got a consolation prize of the state prison, which probably back then was quite useful because you would have prisoners to build your roads and your buildings and stuff. But today it's very funny to think about getting a prison as a consolation prize. But Denver has been our state capital ever since 1881.
And it's so much of the city exists now because of the influence of the state capital. But it is kind of funny in that Denver existed as the biggest city in the state before it became the state capital. Like state capitals occupy kind of a weird place in America. They're very random. You get some states where the state capital is the largest city in the state. And you found out 17 different states have the state capital as their largest city. So that leaves another, 33 states where that's not the case. But since Denver happened first, the state capital is not like at the confluence of Cherry Creek and, the South Platte River. It's in this other kind of random place. And so it was actually kind of the state capital was picked and basically constructed in like the suburbs, basically, of Denver at that time.
And the fact that there was a landowner who was willing to contribute land for the state capital was a selling point for why Denver should have been the capital in the first place. People were very critical of this landowner at the time because he had a lot of land around the capital that he hoped to make a lot of money off of.
And he did. He made
a ton of money off of that. But yes, our capital is just kind of located out there because some guy was willing to dedicate his land.
I think it was like the person whose last name is Archer, which is why we have like a Archer's road, like avenue in Denver. He owned like the land, which was La Alma Lincoln Park. That was the other credible possible place for a state capital, was where now the actual La Alma Lincoln Park is. So imagine the capital being there. That would have been silly.
I would have loved it.
But like, we're so used to it that we take stuff for granted. But like, there are downsides to being the state capital as well. And it was kind of fun just to go through and think about, rather than the news of the day, like, what is the benefit to having this big city that we live in and all have jobs that are probably not working for the state government? You know, most of us listening and speaking don't work for the state government. Like, what benefit does it confer on us, just as the people living here, that this is the state capital? And what are the harms that we kind of like don't even perceive? You know, maybe because they're not that big a deal.
And the Pueblo chieftain, the day that they found out that Pueblo was not selected as the state capital, was quick to point out that they actually didn't even want to be the capital because of many of the cons we're going to reference. They said, "We may have missed the state capital, but we also have missed the corrupting influences of a legislative lobby. And our wives and our tender maidens will not be exposed to the insidious wiles of the polished member from the rural districts." So, you know, even back then, people were aware that bringing the capital city to your city was not all sunshine and rainbows.
Polished member, it seems kind of like...
Mamma mia.
Like a euphemism for, you know, talking about...
How dare you say that in front of our tender maidens?
So like, there are some general cons to being a state capital, as the Pueblo chieftain so accurately kind of noted. For instance, misspelling the word capital, which is very frustrating. In English, the capital with an OL is the building, and the capital with an AL is the kind of general place of like where the state house is, or this, you know, civic center is.
And we ran into this in the making of this episode. You texted me and you said, "Do you want to do an episode about the capital?" And you had spelled it OL, so I was like, well, state legislation? Like, I guess I can see what state legislation's coming up. And you're like, no, being the state capital, and then you spell it AL. I'm like, oh.
And I get confused with this all the time because Capitol Hill is, I just always spell it wrong. And Ken, if you're listening, thank you for correcting my spelling on so many occasions. So, like, that's a big problem, right? Probably the biggest problem. A couple other problems that, like, we just kind of experience and we're used to. I say problems, but maybe just downsides, right? Like, if you want to come and protest something at the state capitol, they're going to like make a change to like teacher pay or whatever. And if you're not a teacher and you don't really care about teacher pay, you have to deal with the big marches and the shutdown of the streets and stuff like that. Like that's just a fact of life, is that the political organizing comes here to do the work, which involves rallies, it involves speeches, it involves kind of fusty people doing boring things. And that might be a little annoying to you.
And I mean, genuinely, like there are kind of benefits to that, right? Where like everybody after the protest needs to go eat lunch somewhere. That's really good for our economic engine. But, you know, we pay for like police presence. We pay for all the employees and everything that makes those protests allowed to happen. A lot of that's Denver municipal funds. That's our general fund paying for that.
I mean, we're paving the roads that the protesters are walking their dirty little feet down.
Now we gotta sweep them.
So anyhow, that's really the biggest con, is of course the state capital means a lot of extra work for the place where like all of this business is being conducted, but there's no property tax collected on state land. Other states do this differently, actually. Like they'll do like a capital city like support grant, essentially, which is just meant to be payment to the city directly to say, sorry, thanks for having firefighters. Thanks for having like police. Thanks for paving the roads and clearing the roads of snow and stuff. Other cities, other states have like payment in lieu of taxes, what they call pilots. In Colorado, we do have kind of like a pilot system, but because we're still mostly a pretty rural state, it's all just about pass-through money for the feds for like national forest land. So that's kind of the biggest downside, right? Is that like if Denver was not a big city that had a diverse economy, it would be like really difficult to have, a big state presence in the city and not being able to collect any property tax. So I read a really interesting article before this that was done by, I think, the Harvard School of Business, and they had been essentially commissioned by the city of like Trenton, New Jersey. The population of New Jersey is like 9 million people. And the population of Trenton is like 90,000 people, right? So Trenton is a very small city in the state of New Jersey. 1% of the population lives there. There are literally no hotels in Trenton, which I guess maybe was crazy then and is still crazy now.
You can have a capital where there are no hotels. Someone needs to go back to the 1800s and tell our legislators.
Yeah, I do not understand how that is even like feasible. But it's also geographically quite small, Trenton. But like the fact is like the state capital area basically takes up like 13% of the entire city's land area, which means then property taxes have to be really quite high on the remainder of the city in order to provide that. So that's the big con. A couple other quick cons, just having to talk politics in normal conversation and talking to like people with big egos and that are like total hacks. That's kind of annoying. Another con is that because state capitals are big, grand buildings, and we have sort of like a aesthetic preference for like big, grand, neoclassical things still as a society, they tend to get a lot of kind of these like capital dominance overlays and view planes originating to and from state capitals. There is a view plane at the top of like the kind of steps of the Capitol looking towards the mountains in Denver, which suppresses the height of development kind of looking west directly from the Capitol. That is a cost that we have to pay, right? Like probably fairly close to the state capitol is valuable land, and close to downtown is valuable land. You could maybe build a 20-story building there were it not for that overlay. But that's actually that's very common. So that's just a general con.
I understand you hate the state capitol, but I love capitals. I love capital cities. I love our 17 big ones, and I love our 33 small ones. They're all great in my eyes. Denver's the greatest, of course. Think about all the people who come here because they have a lot of education. There are a lot of people who are in the area because not only, of all the things that work to support state legislators, like nonprofit centers and think tanks that help shape policy, but because there's been all this historic investment from the federal and the state governments into the area, it just means that there's all those additional jobs in the area, right? Like our administrative offices for the various services that are provided in our capital city provide a lot of jobs. These administrative offices don't necessarily have to be in Denver or any capital city, but it's kind of a trick of history that it once made a lot of sense for all of your main offices to be centrally located in one area. Because if somebody needed to go testify in front of the legislature, say, they could just walk there from wherever they were. And if they were on the Western Slope, they wouldn't be able to walk there. It would be a day's journey or more. I don't even know how long it takes to get by horse. Do you know? Do you know horse travel times?
Yeah, I do, but I just want to let you wiggle over there, so I won't.
Oh, you won't tell me, yeah.
No, I'm not going to tell you that.
You know so much about horses.
I do a lot.
So just the sheer amount of investment. I mean, to your point, the state is not paying property taxes on the property that they have, and so there's kind of the downside there, but all the investment from all the people who are here to make the legislature work, that's great for our economy.
Yeah, like if you heard that a big company was moving to Denver and they were going to have fairly high paying jobs and they were going to employ 10,000 people, you would think, wow, what a big win for economic development in Denver. It's just that happened in 1881.
Right.
And we've been sort of reaping the benefit of having like some state jobs that have been here in Denver since.
Another kind of flip side to a point you brought up, we love our big, beautiful buildings and view planes that can kind of ruin some economic development, but also we get some big, beautiful buildings.
That's true.
I mean, some of my favorite places to show people in town are the buildings that were built long ago when we were making this the capital of our state. Also, where else are you going to throw a party? When we have our 150th anniversary this year, this is where we're going to have it. It's going to be in Denver. It's going to be great, right? And when we have 3 championship parades, despite Bo Nix's ankle, we're going to have them here in Denver. That is either because we are the capital or it is downstream of the fact that those sports teams chose to be here due to the fact that we are the largest city in the capital.
It is actually tough to disentangle, right? Yeah. So I'll give you, in 1904, Denver was the largest city in the state of Colorado. That's still true today. But actually, Denver had a quarter of the entire state's population, right? That is not the case anymore, but with a population just shy of 6 million people in Colorado and with a city population of 730,000, according to most recent estimates, that's like 12 to 13% of the population is still here in Denver, which means that like we basically get one congressional delegation, member from us. We have like a lot of legislators that are here, but like who's responsible? Like, would we win the competition today if it were held? Would we deserve to win that competition today if it were held? It's kind of pointless to disentangle. Like, oh, well, so much of the city grew up around the fact that we had legislators coming for certain times of the year here to Denver, and all of the kind of squabbles over who gets control of certain powers, counties, states, cities, like all of those things were resolved basically because of the tensions here in Denver and that it affected other cities. I'll give you a different one. Like, think about the fact that we have the Civic Center in Denver. The Civic Center exists there because the state capitol was there kind of first, right? Like, we had City Hall in a different place before Denver became the state capital. But after Denver became the state capital and after we became a consolidated city and county and they kind of wanted to move all of the services, and I don't know, there was probably some graft. There was quite a bit of graft going on at that time too. The Civic Center kind of moved into that area and is now part of the way that we experience Denver and the history of the City Beautiful movement across the United States. So what's the point of disentangling the good or bad of that? It just is what it is, and it forms the shape of the city we have today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that there is no way to talk about, being our largest city without being the capital. And it's tough to talk about being the capital without being the largest city. They feed into one another. This is a pro and a con, is that we provide a lot of services here in Denver. We provide all kinds of, social safety net. That's excellent, right? If you are taking advantage of any of these programs, that's really great for you because it's that much easier to get to an appointment or to talk to somebody in person. But it's a con because part of providing these services is that we're providing them largely for a region, right? This is the example that I was given before we were recording, but Denver Health, which we just voted to increase our taxes on, is something you get to take advantage of if you live in Lakewood or Edgewater. And that's great for them, but they are benefiting because we raised our taxes. I'm very glad to have Denver Health in our city. That's a really awesome service that we provide, but we are kind of providing that downstream of the fact that we're a capital city. We've been talking a lot about Denver already. Do we want to separate the cons and pros? I mean, we already kind of talked a little bit about these things.
I would say that there's the kind of impersonal aspect of these pros and cons, and then there's the personal aspect, right? So, like, again, recency bias. Like, if you moved here 20 years ago, if you grew up in Colorado and did that fourth grade history class, only in the last couple decades, you saw John Hickenlooper recently be mayor of Denver, then become governor of Colorado. That's actually only the second time in Colorado's history that's happened.
Quig Newton was the other one, right?
That's not it. That's not it. It's not Quig Newton. But good shout out for our goat.
My guy Quig.
But so you would then kind of think like that there's always been a Denver centrism in like Colorado state politics. But like a lot of laws that are still on the books, like a lot of the way that we have handled certain problems in Colorado have been because at one point the legislators hated Denver, were from different political parties, had different ideologies than Denver. And that's kind of like easier now than it's ever been. Like this would be about the period of time that we're currently living in where Denver actually has the lowest proportion of the state's population, probably of any other moment in the state's history. And so we are kind of blessed at the moment with like people who care and are being attentive. For instance, a couple years ago, the city said, hey, we'd like to do some version of expanding housing affordability, but because Colorado doesn't have laws that allow us to do inclusionary zoning, we'll have to do it in this voluntary way. And then some lobbying happened and the state legislature changed the law pretty quickly as Denver was going through that process of exploring what it would be like to try and incentivize more affordable housing construction. The state legislature said, oh, okay, well, we'll just like pass a law that allows for inclusionary zoning. That's kind of a gimme, and that's a Denver-based kind of gimme. Versus you could have a politician like Roy Romer, for instance, who hated Denver. And even though he was a Democrat and the city was also largely Democratic, I just thought that like RTD was bad and tried to do everything in his power to take the ability to make light rail happen in Denver away from RTD and put it in a brand new commission. There were fully like 2 separate like legislative sessions in the late 1980s where Romer was just pushing everybody to try and take all these powers away from RTD. Why? Is that the most important thing that the state government has to deal with in the year 1989? No, but like that's the sort of attention drawn on us by being the state capital and having people actually here going, ew, this place is icky. I don't like this.
So essentially what you're talking about here is that being the capital city gets you very specific attention from the legislature. That attention can be positive in the form of sometimes how we change our housing. It can also be negative in terms of you get a governor who doesn't like the city and wants to take away its ability to form light rail. The outsider views of Denver really can shape legislative outcomes in more profound ways than you're going to get in Canyon City or any other city in the state, right? Like there's going to be very little city-specific legislation almost anywhere else in the state.
And that's natural, I guess, is the kind of last thing I wanted to say about this. Because, you know, for my family who like lives up in Evergreen, it's sort of annoying to them that there seems to be this kind of perceived Denver centrism in Colorado state politics. One of the 2 people who very likely is going to be the next governor, like currently lives in Denver and has been like a Denver-based politician like their whole kind of life. But there's actually a positive then for the people who don't live in Denver as well, which is that there was a great study that came out of Monash University, which is in Melbourne, Australia, about how like the more rural the capital of the country or the state is, the more likely for corruption, graft, insider politics. Like it might seem a little frustrating that like if you want to come down from Elizabeth, Colorado to like represent your constituents that you have to drive into the city and there's traffic and stuff like that here. But actually like it demonstrably with more attention, with more media, with more activists, with more academics, with a bigger population that can have on any given day a bigger sort of reaction to the policies that are being debated, you get more honest government and you get way less corruption. So this is just a sort of an observed phenomenon. So it's actually better for the people who kind of get annoyed by how they think that this is being dominated by the big city, that it stays in the big city.
Essentially, there are a lot of positives and negatives to being the capital city of any state. It's true here. It's true elsewhere across the United States. The weird tricks of history that have meant that everything got clustered here and that our rail ended up coming into the city and, you know, all of these things have created the city that we know today. But these are issues that have been dealt with since the very first capital city, on the Capitoline Hill of Rome, where we get to the term Capitol from. That's why it's spelled with an O. Being the capital city of anywhere brings a lot of issues and it brings a lot of opportunities too. I think for us as urbanists, it's important to look to our history and figure out, you know, like what opportunities we have at our disposal now to push forward new urbanist principles that we uniquely get here in Denver as a result.
In the spirit of history, you also have to be ready as an urbanist to try and defend your city, your capital, when the Visigoths inevitably
they
come
will be
in,
here.
charging, raiding.
From Canyon City.
Thanks for listening. The Denver Urbanism Podcast is a production of longtime blog Denver Infill and sister blog Denver Urbanism. For more information, go online to denverurbanism.com. Bye.